I'm Nancy Pearlman, here in the northeast part of Florida. On this edition of ECONEWS, we explore St. Augustine, the city where Europeans first settled in what is now the United States. Not only do we find out about the cultural heritage, but we will see some of the 42 miles of pristine beaches and other coastal ecosystems. Stay with us. There are over 74,000 acres here in the GTM Research Reserve. We're only going to see a little bit, but we'll find out about how important this estuary is and enjoy the wildlife.
Welcome, I'm Michael Shirley. I'm the director of the Guana Talamato Matanzas National Estuarine Research Reserve, and you're here in beautiful Ponte Vedra Beach visiting our education center and our 74,000 acre research reserve. Our research reserve is part of a 28 reserve system funded jointly by the state of Florida and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. And the purpose of a research reserve, which is similar for every research reserve around the country, is to be a platform for research and for education. So as you tour the reserve, you'll see children out here being educated, you'll see researchers doing research on all sorts of things like mangroves and plankton and fisheries in this area. You'll also, if you come here at night, you'll see folks out there studying the sea turtles and early in the morning counting sea turtle nests. It's a great experience for the researchers and for the educators, but it's also a great experience for our visitors. We have a lot of educational and ecotourism amenities here that our community can use. Our education center right here behind us is one of those. And we have beaches. We have 300,000 visitors that come to our beaches every year. We've been selected as the #1 place to kayak in Northeast Florida for the last 2 years in a row by Folio Weekly. So we've got a really great combination of research, education, and public use amenities here at the reserve. This area is unique because it's been protected for many years. It was put into conservation in 1984. Even prior to that, it was a hunting camp, and it wasn't used for much more than just folks being able to use the area for hunting. Our research results here are really to do with getting baseline information. So when we go out and explore this wonderful habitat was set aside because it's so pristine and so good to get baseline information about a functioning estuarine system, that we set up long-term water quality monitoring. We set up long-term monitoring of our marshes, which are extremely vulnerable to sea level rise, because what we're doing is we're actually measuring the relative height of those marshes and how they change with time. So we'll have a way of, it's like a canary in the coal mine kind of approach, where we've got a sentinel site comparison at all these research reserves where we can set up this long-term monitoring of water quality, of habitat and species that tell us not only about the condition of the estuaries across the U.S., but also information that can plug right locally into our community and decisions being made here.
I'm the Education Coordinator, GTM Research Reserve.
We're on the beach that you call coquina, but that's really the name of just one of the bivalve?
There's many different organisms. The primary one, this little one that we have here, that's a little coquina shell. And if you look down the beach, it's the majority of shell that we'll see. Coquina makes up a big history, part of the history of Florida. If you go to St. Augustine, a lot of the buildings are made out of coquina rock, which is coquina shell broken down and compacted to form a rock. And they actually use that to build, like the Fort Castillo de San Marcos is constructed out of coquina shell. Every morning during sea turtle nesting season, our volunteers will come and monitor the beach, and what they're looking for is the tracks from the female sea turtle up on the beach. The tracks actually are different from species to species. That's how we know what type of sea turtle made this nest. The way that we help also identify this nest, because we have to identify it internally and also on seaturtle.org, is by marking the nest with a letter and a number. So this is indicating that this is the north nest, and it's the second nest found within the North Guana Beach. We also staple a permit identification card onto the nest just for educational purposes and to let people know that they shouldn't and can't be walking in this area, walking inside the nest. The babies will hatch. It's very species dependent. the number of days. Usually the larger the sea turtle, the more days it takes for incubation. Usually the nesting with loggerheads is around 60 days, I believe, and so what will come after 60 days, we actually come out and evaluate the nest again, meaning that we'll dig it up, confirm that the nest actually hatched, and then we'll count how many hatched, which is how we actually document how many sea turtle nests are found on the beach.
Humans are always a major predator. We're trying to protect them now, but you have other species that might grab a baby turtle.
Yeah, so humans are a huge predator for the sea turtle, but yeah, the sea turtle has many other predators. Even before entering the ocean, they have predators right here on the beach. One of the predators that are actually has its own little hole right next to the clutch is the ghost crab. And then other predators that these guys face on the way down are birds, raccoons, ants sometimes get into the nest, so they have a lot to face. Sea turtles have about a 1% chance of survival to adulthood.
Well, I look forward to coming back and seeing the babies. Coming back another time. We have to be careful not to disrupt the mothers when they're making the nest, but this is wonderful that the reserve is protecting them. With me is Chris Kelly. He is owner of Ripple Effect Eco Tours. We're going to have a kayak trip into a national research reserve. What are we going to see?
Today we're going to see an abundance of wildlife out here in the reserve, and we're going to explore areas that most people never get far enough off the beaten path. We have 40,000 acres of contiguous unfragmented conservation land here, and one of the best fully functioning and productive estuarine habitats that you'll find anywhere in coastal Florida.
And the fun part about being in a kayak is we can see the water, the land, the birds, the animals so close and differently than if we were just walking along the shore.
Yeah, Nancy, so up close and personal, and our impact on these systems is very minimized by these kayaks, and it does provide us the ability to get way back up in there and see things that most people never get the chance to.
Every age, 6 to 100.
6 to 93, I think, is our record.
Is a crowned conch. It's got a shell protecting it on 3/4 of its sides. But if a predator picks it up, it's got to be able to protect the soft body. And that protection is what's known as the operculum. It's essentially the trap door for the animal. Now keep in mind, these crowned conchs are gastropods. Gastropoda, stomach, foot. If yours starts walking around on your hand, it is tasting you as we speak, all right? And they're looking for tasty morsels.
So where we're going to be going today is considered an ecotone, and when we look at an ecotone, what we're looking at is the competition between temperate and subtropical. So temperate, the colder climates to the north, and the tropical areas come and compete right here at marine land. And what we see is the competition of the plant communities moving back and forth all the time. What we pay most attention to is the mangroves, the tropically evolved species of trees that have migrated out of South Florida up into the marine land area just in the last decade or so. What that's competing against is called the salt marsh smooth cordgrass, or Spartina alterniflora, and it's a constant battle and a constant struggle. Mother Nature left to her own devices. It's fascinating as a naturalist to see this competitiveness in nature.
But humans are impacting it because of climate change.
But the general trend has been that line has been moving farther and farther north, almost all the way up to the Georgia border now.
What's going to be great is enjoying this beautiful natural area in a kayak, so we're really connected to nature.
Absolutely. It's definitely the best way to get out and get yourself connected with some of these incredibly productive areas and beautiful areas at the same time. What we provide is a balance of leisure and environmental education. So it's not any physical feat to go out there for a couple hours with us. It could be one of the most relaxing things you've ever done. The takeaway value is tremendous, and what we really like to have people take away from this is a real sense of place and a sense of purpose of how valuable these estuarine systems are.
So everybody can love it more. I already love it just being here. I want to thank you so very much for this opportunity.
My pleasure.
With me is Paul Zielinski. He is the museum educator here at the First Light Maritime Society. And we're at one of the first lighthouses here in Florida. I'm going to be climbing 219 steps.
Yes, that's correct.
Is that an average height for a lighthouse?
It's tall for lighthouses, and in fact, because our steps are relatively shallow, so there are some lighthouses you'll feel like you're climbing a ladder almost because the steps are so far apart. We have steps that are actually really close together. So you're going to be climbing more steps, but they're going to be easier to climb.
And I think I'm going to see the view of the beach because I expected a lighthouse on the ocean, but we're about a mile away. When and how did that happen?
It happened in the middle of the 20th century, the 1950s, 1960s. So normally you're right, lighthouses are closer to the ocean. But our lighthouse is kind of in a dynamic environment where sands shift and change. And the beginning of the middle of the 20th century, we've actually had more sand show up and new pieces of land show up out there. So we're farther back from the ocean than we originally were.
So different agencies have operated this over the years to provide help to the ships. Even during World War II, the Coast Guard took over, or was it always a Coast Guard? But of course, just a few years ago, a nonprofit took over.
That's right. So the federal government operated lighthouses for most of the country's history. So the Lighthouse Service operated them until 1939, and then the Coast Guard took over. Lighthouse Service became part of the Coast Guard. Coast Guard has been operating lighthouses, but recently they've been starting to hand them over to interested nonprofit organizations who would like to keep them operational, keep them open for our better understanding of our maritime history and heritage. So we've owned the lighthouse since 2002 as a private nonprofit.
So much interesting history. I hope that we can get a little bit of it now and learn more later.
Absolutely.
My name is Dr. Sam Turner, and I am the Director of Archaeology here at LAMP, the Lighthouse Archaeological Maritime Program at the St. Augustine Lighthouse and Museum in St. Augustine, Florida, where we are currently excavating a late 18th century wreck from the very end of the American Revolutionary period, which is in fact a Loyalist evacuation transport that was bringing Loyalist evacuees from Charleston, South Carolina to East Florida. No one has looked at a Loyalist wreck, archaeologically speaking, so it's a very important find in helping to illuminate our American history. What happens when a ship breaks up is a whole collection of these objects fall from the ship onto the seabed, and after centuries in the ocean, they look like this. This is an X-ray of the object we just saw. Here we see a pistol, quite a few spheres, solid bright spheres, a round object, and then we also have some dark shadowy objects. Now, the bright part of the X-ray is where the X-ray doesn't penetrate. And so we know we have good metal there. Where we have shadows, that is where the object, usually iron, has completely corroded away. And it has left a void, which the conservator can then crack into, flush out, and then cast with resin epoxy to produce an exact replica of the object. This object, which is deteriorated and gone, this is something called a hank. These are hanks. And this is a hank which is from a replica ship called the Lynx, which is a replica of a War of 1812 privateer. This is an archaeological example from South Florida from the second half of the 19th century. And what these hanks were used for were for holding the foresails to the forestays. So the forestay holds the mast up and prevents the mast from falling backwards. And so since they had that line there, they just use it to hang a sail on. And so the hank acts essentially as a glorified curtain hook, if you will. This is lead shot. And here we have an example of that lead shot right here. Okay. You can see it's dimpled. This is what we would call barnyard shot. You take a colander, which you would fill with hot coals. Then you would take your molten lead and you would pour them onto the hot coals. And that lead would hit the coals, it would stay molten. It would hit the colander, which would be very hot from the coals. And then it would fall through the colander into a bucket of water about 3.5 feet below. And because it was still semi-molten inside, when it hit the water, the inside would sort of compress and you'd get that dimple effect. So this is something we're finding in large quantities on the site. And this is an example of a Queen Anne's pistol that's been curated and not left in the ocean for a couple of hundred years. It's made of brass and steel. The trigger guard, the frizzen, and the jaws for holding the flint are all made of steel. And of course, it's got a wooden stock. And this object is going to be fairly complex for the conservator to preserve, because it has to be disassembled. These are all 1 meter units, so we've excavated all these areas so far. But because we've got a cannon dated 1780, we know that we're in the Revolutionary War period. And the only people wearing royal provincial buttons at that time were royalists.
By studying them, we find out more about how people lived in the past.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And how they related to their environment here.
How they related to their environment here, and in the east coast of the United States. These folks having come out of Charleston, and a number of them were from the inside of the Carolinas. You know, they were inland. They were planters and such.
I look forward to coming back and discovering more about your discoveries.
Well, thank you, and we look forward to having you back. Thank you.
Thank you. With me is Jen Anderson. She is the general curator here at the Alligator Farm Zoological Park. I'm looking at a lot of alligators. What's the difference between a crocodile and an alligator?
Alligator's broad head shape is made for taking like items the size of a raccoon or someone's dog and just kind of grabbing them and chomping them and swallowing them whole. Versus a crocodile, that long slender snout is made for taking big things and making them into small pieces. So the crocodiles chase us down a lot faster than the alligators.
One species is on the North American continent, the other is on the African?
Not necessarily, because there's only two true alligator species. That's the American alligator, found here in the southeastern United States, and the Chinese alligator. There are caiman, which are found throughout Central and South America. They are like a close cousin of the alligator. Everything else is crocodiles, and they're found almost everywhere.
I'm looking at these, and quite frankly, they look like sculptures. They look like fake pieces of art, and yet they're all alive.
They are alive. Do you want to go test that out?
I will take your word for it.
Good idea. I typically say that, an American alligator can live 60 to 80 years. They grow about a foot a year from hatching, and they're about 6 to 8 inches when they hatch out of the egg, so a foot a year, and then they start slowing down. So if the female alligator, they can get 8 to 9 feet. Males get larger, 12 to 14 feet. And reptiles grow their entire lives. They definitely slow down, but they do grow a long time. They continue to grow. Unlike us, we stop growing taller, we may get shorter, we may get a little wider, but the alligators will just keep growing just at a slower rate.
This natural bird rookery, in about 2 acres, has at least 10 species, hundreds of individuals, nesting and raising their young in live oak, magnolia, and cedar. A spectacular sight.
We're here in the nation's oldest city, St. Augustine, at the Castillo de San Marcos. The Castillo is part of our National Park Service. It is the oldest masonry fortification in the United States. The service was named by the Spanish for the Castle of St. Mark's. It was built between 1672 and 1692, making it 343 years old. The Castillo was built to protect the city from pirates and British invaders. St. Augustine, of course, was occupied by Spanish since 1568. It had been sacked a number of times over the years. 9 wooden forts had preceded this beautiful fortification. And the Castillo is a star shape with 4 corners. It has a bastion in each quarter. There's a courtyard down in the center, which is where they would do the military parades. And below us there are rooms where the Spanish soldiers would stay. Now, St. Augustine was a presidio, So we had a whole colony here that lived within the city walls. And when the city was under siege, all of the Spanish residents would come inside the Castillo. They would bring their livestock and all of their food. There was water here, and they would stay protected in the fort while they were under siege. The Castillo is made of coquina rock, which is our native rock here. It was quarried on Anastasia Island, where they cut it out of the ground. It was very soft, and then they shaped it to the blocks to build the fort itself. Now, when the fort was under siege, this rock was very soft and porous, so when a cannon would hit it, it would either absorb in or just bounce right back out. Castillo was built by the Spanish, and they occupied it until it became a British territory for just 20 years in the late 18th century. And then it went back to Spanish, and then when Florida became a territory of the U.S. in 1821, it became U.S. occupied. And it stayed that way, and it operated as a military outpost through the late 19th century, and then it was used for storage. It finally became part of the Park Service in 1921. Above the courtyard, you'll see that there is a gun deck, and it is open all the way around the top of the Castillo. It looks out on the Matanzas River and the Matanzas Inlet. This was perfect for Spanish soldiers to be able to watch for any approaching ships or enemies.
I'm with John Higgins. You're a reenactor representing an officer of the Spanish Army
Yes, I am.
from the 1740s.
1740s, yes.
And the hat's actually very practical because if you're carrying a weapon, you don't want it to hit your hat.
Yes, if you're carrying a weapon, you one side or the other or across your back. So that's why the tricorn hat.
And the red piece here tells us you're Spanish.
Yes.
What other colors would tell me who my enemies are?
If it was black, it'd be British, white is French, orange is Dutch, green is Italian.
And you apparently had some important service because you have your medal.
Yes, this was a meritorious service medal from the king. And I'm here portraying a surgeon of the town. My uniform is an officer's uniform, and we try to bring history alive to the visitors to the fort.
Well, thank you so very much for showing us what they wore back then and how they lived and how you were a surgeon.
I appreciate that, and thank you very much for the interview.
Barbara, I've been having so much fun seeing the natural areas, the beaches, the wildlife, spectacular. But the downtown historic area is so charming as well. We're here in one of the most important areas. What am I looking at?
Where we are now, we have across the street the former Ponce de Leon Hotel, built by Henry Flagler in 1887. It is now Flagler College. At the time it was built, it was the most glamorous hotel in the world, with electric lights and running water. Thomas Edison put the electricity in, Tiffany put the glass in the dining rooms, and Maynard designed the interiors.
You have great adaptive use because I'm looking at what is now the Leitner Museum and City Hall, but it used to be a hotel too.
Yes, our City Hall is in another historic building. It shares it with Leitner Museum. This was the Alcazar Hotel. This was Henry Flagler's Overflow Hotel.
I think you have the oldest street in the United States.
Yes, we have Avilés Street, which is right off of the town plaza, which dates back to 1587.
You've created walking areas so that one can either take a trolley to get a guided tour or read the signs, walk around, and of course stop at the delicious food establishments that are in existence here.
This is a very walkable city. You have different wayfinding signs, so it's wonderful for finding your way. We have plenty of maps. You can take guided walking tours or riding tours. The food is phenomenal. We even have walking food tours where you can eat your way through history.
Well, I've been eating very well here. Fine dining, casual dining, but it's all delicious. But I'm curious about the name. How did that come into existence?
Well, you have St. Augustine was discovered by Pedro Menendez, our city founder, on September 28th.
The statue behind us.
Statue behind us. He was our city founder. He came here in 1565 and he spotted land on August 28th, which was the feast of St. Augustine. And just north of us is Pontevedra, and that's kind of a newer name, but it still has a Spanish influence. That was an area where there were a lot of Spanish haciendas and farmland and minerals through the years. But it is now our coastal resort area, and it is spectacular.
I'm going to walk around, eat some more, enjoy the history that I find here, the beautiful weather. Thank you so very much for the wonderful trip. St. Augustine, here in the northeast part of Florida, has so many more beaches and waterways to explore, plant and animal life to observe, and historical sites to experience. I look forward to returning to this fascinating area. On behalf of our nonprofit organization, Educational Communications and ECONEWS, I'm Nancy Pearlman, wishing you a natural, unspoiled environment.